I believe you can start. So good morning to all of you, and thank you for joining our webinar today titled Brand Protection in Laos, Implications for European SMEs in the Region. I'm Enrico Bargnani, the Deputy Executive Director here at the European Chamber of Commerce in Laos. And if it's the first time joining us, one of the things that we do here at the Chamber is to assist companies in different stages in relation to the Lao market, whether they are simply considering expanding their operations here, or if they're already here, to assist them with business services, advocacy, and marketing. This session today is offered in collaboration with the Southeast Asia Intellectual Property SME Helpdesk, which is an initiative of the European Commission to provide complementary and confidential advice to European SMEs in order for you to protect and enforce intellectual property rights in the Southeast Asia region. And they do this via a variety of tools, such as the recent one-on-one consultation service, helpline, workshops, interactive tools, and other publications through the website. So I would encourage you to look at the website and these resources after the webinar. And without any further ado, I'll introduce you to the speaker of today and the topic, and for him to take over. Today we have with us Dino Santaniello, head of Tilleke and Gibbins here in Laos, and the external expert of the Southeast Asia IP Helpdesk. He will tell us today about the intellectual property landscape in Laos, requirements to protect your IP and trademark, as well as some of the challenges that companies providing services or goods in Laos, whether directly or indirectly, might be facing without any proper registration or setup. I'll now leave it to Dino. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can use the Q&A function, and I will dedicate the last 15 minutes to read these questions. And this session is recorded, and at the end of the webinar, you will be receiving the slides from the speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Enrico. Can you hear me? It's fine, right? Okay, good. So I will start with the webinar. Good morning to everybody, and good morning from Vientiane from me. So today we'll be speaking about, and I will just read the title, Brand Protection in Laos and the implications for European SMEs in the region. So even though we talk about SMEs here, it actually can apply to SMEs, but also multinational companies. That's the information that will be provided here can be used widely and to everybody. So I do hope that the information that will be provided to you today will be helpful. So about me, it's me on the picture. Some 10 years ago or something, probably, but it's me. I'm now in Laos for about 8 years, working for Tilleke and Gibbins. So we are a law firm. Our parent company is based in Bangkok, where we're pretty big, about 500 people working there. We also have offices in Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Indonesia, and Vietnam, where we do have 2 offices. I'm saying that just to say that we do provide a wide range of services in all those countries, but specifically also about maybe what is the subject today about intellectual property. So we are regularly involved in intellectual property matter, whether it's about registration of intellectual property, but also intellectual property enforcement actions, which is pretty maybe less common in Laos for law firms to provide. So if you have any questions in relation to intellectual property enforcement after my presentation, please do feel free to ask me. I would be more than happy to answer. And I'm also usually involved in everything that touches upon M&A transactions. So not just about intellectual property, but I can have that maybe that perspective of intellectual property, not only for registration process, but also intellectual property in M&A transaction, for instance. So I guess it's a good background and insights, and I would be more than happy if you have some question that maybe go beyond the topic of today. So do feel free to ask me some question at the end of the session. So before I start talking about the agenda of the webinar, I will be speaking briefly about Southeast Asia IP SME Helpdesk and the services that they do provide. Enrico just provided some brief information about it. So what is the Southeast Asia IP SME Helpdesk? So this is a initiative from the European Commission, which provides free, confidential, business-focused advice to small and medium enterprises and intermediaries in the European Union and the other countries of the Single Market Program. So here we're talking about Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Ukraine, etc., relating to intellectual property rights in Southeast Asia. So on these slides, you can actually have a brief look at the type of services provided by the Southeast Asia IP SME Helpdesk. So firstly, through the inquiry helpline, you can send any IP question that you're related to Southeast Asia to the helpdesk and receive a reply within 3 working days. Secondly, you can see also as well that the helpdesk organizes monthly training workshops and live webinars which is tailored to the needs of SMEs across Europe and Southeast Asia, such as Laos, throughout the year. Please do feel free to subscribe to the newsletter and connect with the team on social media to keep yourself updated on the upcoming activities. Also, the Helpdesk provides access to a wide range of publications in terms of country fact sheets, and I guess you will be also able to find the one about Laos specifically, but also industry-specific IP guides on general IP guides on various IP topics. And these guides can be easily found on the Helpdesk website. And last but not least, the Helpdesk also offers IP business tool, for example, the IP cost tool, which is also available for download from the official website. So that's a very useful tool, the IP cost tool. For instance, if you want to register trademarks in more than one jurisdiction, there is a very easy way to compare all the official fees for the registration of your trademark in all the countries you're interested about. So that's just one of the functions of the IP cost tool. But please do go on the website and download the application also as well. And eventually, and I think that's a great initiative, a one-to-one consultation. So you're welcome to book free of charge one-to-one consultation with the IP business advisor of the Helpdesk via the following link that you may see on your screen now. So Benoit will be very, very happy to speak with you on any IP issue that you may have, or just provide information in relation to registration, but also how to prevent a misuse of your intellectual property in Southeast Asia. So please do feel free to reach out to Benoit anytime. Okay, so now about the agenda of the webinar today. It will be in 4 parts, and 4 parts for each part about 15 minutes. So I may not you may think that sometime I'm not going deep into details, but again, do feel free to raise any question that you may have at the very end of the webinar. I'll be more than happy to answer. So on the first part, I will be providing a brief overlook of the economic situation of the country, economic outlook, but also talking about the potential of Laos being a logistic hub, specifically between the Chinese market and the ASEAN market. So it connects actually to intellectual property, because when we talk about hub, we're talking about the transiting of goods through one country to another. And this is where Laos, I think, has a key role to play in relation to intellectual property enforcement and prevention of the transiting of counterfeit goods across the ASEAN market. On the second part of the webinar, we'll be speaking about the intellectual property landscape, specifically the regulatory framework of Laos in relation to intellectual property. On the third part, requirements to protect your IP and trademark in Laos. And I would like to note that there will be a focus made on trademark specifically, because as you will see it, trademark is the most common intellectual property that is registered in Laos, and on which I would say we have the most insight in relation to registration, but also in relation to intellectual property enforcement. And then at the very end, IP implications for enterprise providing goods and services without being incorporated in Laos. Here I may briefly speak about some restriction that may apply to foreign investors willing to invest in Laos, and those who choose to actually trade their goods in Laos without having a company. So here the question is how to protect your intellectual property rights while you're not maybe physically implanted in Laos. So first part, introduction to Laos economic outlook and its logistic hub potential. So here a brief overview about Laos. So depending on the statistic that you can find on the internet, Laos has about 7.4 million people. Some statistics may talk about 7.5. Here, I base myself mostly on the Asian Development Bank, but maybe on the World Bank, they have slightly different numbers. But anyway, I would say, depending on the website and the statistics you can find, it would be generally around 7.2 to 7.6 million people in Laos. Literacy rate, I would say 88%, pretty high for the country. So I guess there are some remote areas where it may be kind of difficult. People may not have the same education as here we have in Vientiane capital, for instance, but the literacy rate remain pretty high. Also, Laos is a country with lots of ethnic. Officially, there are more than 40 ethnic recognized by the government, and that's also a lot of languages that are spoken by different ethnic, and some of them in most remote area may speak only their ethnic language, for instance. Access to internet, the same. In remote areas, there may be disparity on the access to internet, but that is something that is very, internet is used every day by people. I'm living myself in the internet capital, and internet is something that people live with every day. For instance, Facebook is used, of course, to contact people, but that is where also most of the sell and purchase are made in Laos also as well. I mean, at least online. GDP growth. So I think that's interesting to talk about it a little bit. In 2020, you may see here a recession. So here we're talking about the COVID period, which hit the country very hard. Specifically, some sectors were totally disrupted. I talk here about specifically maybe hospitality sector. Many hotels closed, many restaurants also closed as well. But since 2021, we see a slight recovery of the country. So here, 2021, 2.3%, 2022, 2.5%. And it is good also to take in consideration that before the COVID, the pace of the growth, GDP growth of the country was pretty fast. For some years, it was above 7%. And before the COVID, it was more or less 5%, 6% also. But it was driven mostly on the use of natural resources. And now we will see that the country is shifting a little bit to maybe developing SMEs specifically. And that's why it's good to have that webinar today. And we can see the switch from, actually the government is even pushing for switching from overuse, I would say, of natural resources through hydropower plant, energy project. And the government is trying to push people to develop their own companies and SMEs to provide more services to the country. In 2023, we can see a forecast, because here the numbers are still not final, from the Asian Development Bank of 3.7%. And there is an expectation in 2024 also to have still a steady growth of the GDP around 4%. And this assessment is made by the Asian Development Bank. So here, I just wanted to provide a little bit of comparison in terms of GDP. As you can see, I mean, there are very dynamic markets in the ASEAN, like Vietnam, Philippines, and Cambodia specifically, Indonesia also as well, of course. So Laos is not yet competing with them in terms of GDP rate and GDP growth. But still, as you can see, Laos is behind, but on the verge to actually recover from the particular difficult situation from the COVID. Maybe one of the biggest issue in Laos as of today is the inflation rate, which was tremendous for the past 2 years. This is due, and you may have heard about the sharp depreciation of the Lao kip against foreign currency, such as US dollar or Thai baht. I remember when I came here in Laos, I would exchange $1 maybe for 8,000 kip or 10,000 kip, if I recall. Now I would exchange $1 for more than 20,000. So it can show you the issue in relation to the inflation, because Laos is not yet a market where there is a strong industry to produce goods locally. So most of the goods will be imported into Laos for the general consumption of the Lao citizen. You may have also seen and heard about those news relating to gas shortage, oil and gas shortage, and people waiting at the gas station to fill in their tank. So this was about a year ago, more than a year ago. So now it's over. It's not happening anymore. But still, we can see that the general price of goods have been impacted by that inflation rate pretty much. To get back on the intellectual property, so here I do provide some statistics in relation to intellectual property application filing, and I will try to look. If you want to have a more updated number, I will try my best to contact with the local authorities and see if we can be provided with numbers from 2023 and 2024. But here I have the numbers from 2018 to 2022. So it can show you, and as I said just before, that the main intellectual property asset that is registered in Laos remains trademark. And there is a steady application filing in that regard. I think for 2023, there was even a surge of more application than for 2022. And you can see here we have divided trademark application according to national application. So meaning that we complete an application form and we go ourselves to the Department of Intellectual Property or the Department of Industry and Commerce to file an application and register our trademark in Laos. And then you can see also as well a category talking about Madrid. So that is what we call the international registration. So that is made out of Laos, but in relation to trademark, to protect a trademark in Laos. Thereafter, you can see patent. So here again, we're talking about application only, not registration. So the application for patents are pretty steady throughout the year. But in terms of registration, the numbers will be way less than they are for the filing. It is our understanding that the consideration and examination of the application of patent is more complex, difficult for the local examiner. And usually there is only a handful of patents that are granted each year. Same thing for petit patent. And I would say one of the other intellectual property asset becomes more and more trendy in order to protect its intellectual property, its industrial design. So the filing of industrial design application is not very high as yet, but as contrary to patent or petit patent, we were able to take action to protect industrial design for some of our clients in the past years based on their industrial design patent that they hold and that they've been granted with by the Department of Intellectual Property. So we expect maybe in the coming years to see an increase of industrial design application. One thing also I would like to add is that here I'm talking about intellectual property that can be registered. So basically copyrights, we do not need to register copyrights in order to be protected. As long as you can prove that you're the author of a painting, drawing, or a cinematographic work, you will be entitled to protection also as well. What can be done though is to record a proof of ownership regarding to your copyright with the Department of Intellectual Property, but that is not something mandatory. I wanted also to shed some light about geographical indication because that concerns maybe more specifically Europe. Here, it's for registration of a geographical indication in 2023 only. And it concerns lots of products from Spain, mostly wine, spirit, and cheese. These were registered for 2023 only. And it's interesting because not so long ago, only two foreign geographical indications were registered in Laos. It was the first foreign geographical indication was champagne, which was registered in Laos, and also Scotch whiskey. So we will see that Laos recently entered into the Lisbon Agreement that provide the possibility to register for geographical indication in Laos more easily for people living abroad. So this is why we have seen that surge of new geographical indication. And from what I understand, there are some more pending geographical indication registration with the Department of Intellectual Property coming from Greece, from France, and so on. So we will see that the European countries and European producer of those goods become more and more interested about the Laotian market and Southeast Asia generally. So about the potential of Laos as being a hub, I think it's good to realize the location of Laos among Southeast Asia. And as you can see, I would say, except for Myanmar, which is in a maybe complicated situation now, Laos is surrounded by dynamic countries, China, of course, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and Myanmar. And Laos is very much in the middle of China and the ASEAN market. And we will see soon that Laos is giving itself the power to actually be that hub that will enhance and facilitate transportation of goods from China down to the ASEAN market. Here is a picture showing the corridors, international trading routes that can be used whenever one importer wants to import or exporter wants to export goods to Laos or to the ASEAN market. As you can see, although Laos may not be the final destination of goods or product, most likely many of those goods, many of those shipments will be crossing the country, transiting through Laos in order to reach the final destination. For instance, if a product arrives in Vietnam and has to be released in the Thai marketplace, it will most likely cross the Laotian marketplace also as well. And this is why I believe that Laos will have a key role to play in relation to prevent counterfeits from spreading over all Southeast Asia. This is because even though Laos is yet not a big market, not a market that the big brands will think about to release their product, but those same big brands will see their goods crossing the country to be distributed all across Southeast Asia. And if those brands or even SMEs do not register their trademarks within Laos, it will not be possible to take any action to stop goods or shipments containing goods infringing intellectual property. So here it's the development of railway network. You may have, of course, heard about the high-speed train, from China down to Laos. So that's one part of the project, because the second part of the project will be to go down to Bangkok. So here again, we're talking about facilitating transport of merchandises, product, and so brands also as well all across Southeast Asia. And on the right side of your screen, you can see that it's a project actually that is going, that is underway now to develop a railway network up to Vietnam, and that will give access to Laos to the sea also as well. And from Vietnam, access to Laos in a more easy way, where of course there will be a transport of passenger, but also that means a potential for more goods, more merchandises to be traded between Vietnam and Laos. So now talking about intellectual property specifically, I will give you now an overview of the intellectual property landscape about laws and regulation. So first of all, what means intellectual property? So that's the definition of the law on intellectual property in Laos that was duly amended just 2 weeks ago. And so the law on intellectual property of 2023, so 2023, that's actually the date where the law was debated and approved at the National Assembly, but it was only recently published on the official gazette of the Ministry of Justice. So according to the Article 2 of the law on IP of Laos, intellectual property is the work of the human mind through inventions and creations. And we can see that the definition is not too different from other international organizations, such as the WIPO, World Intellectual Property Office, which provide that intellectual property. refers to creations of the mind, such as invention, literary and artistic work, design, symbols, name, and images used in the commerce. So basically what we want to say here is that intellectual property should be treated as the same as tangible asset. Even though this is not something that maybe you can touch, but still we can have ownership over intellectual property, and also we can use this intellectual property for our own benefit. The same as if I have a house or maybe a car, I can lease my car to someone else and get some benefit out of it each month through a rental fee. That would be the same that could be applied, for instance, for me allowing someone to use my trademark and getting out of it some royalties or license fee or franchise fee. I mean, you call it however you want, but the idea is pretty much to say that intellectual property has exactly the same, could have exactly the same benefit as any other type of tangible asset. So even though Laos seems to be, it is a landlocked country, seems to be a little bit isolated maybe, but as you can see, Laos is part of many international conventions, many international treaties that's pushed Laos throughout the years to enhance better protection at the same level as the international standards, all maybe more experienced judicial system that you can find in some other countries. So Laos does offer a solid, I think, solid intellectual property regulatory framework, because it's also backed up by international convention. So the most recent, and I just mentioned it before, is the Lisbon Agreement for the Protection of Appellations of Origin and their international registration. So that basically provides to all the countries which are party to that agreement to register their geographical indication into another country that is party to that agreement, and to protect that geographical indication in that country. So I took this instance just before I show you some Spanish geographical indication. Those geographical indications were actually registered from Spain. So there was nobody that came here into Laos to file an application form and to register for the geographical indication. This was done through the Lisbon Agreement system. There is also something that is similar that you may have heard about, the Madrid Protocol system also as well, that allows the registration of international trademark. So that is also something that is possible in Laos. And I just also show you just before that there are two categories of trademark registration, the one that we do here in Laos and the one that are called international registration. Bilateral agreement, I think I would need to maybe update those ones specifically about South Korea and Vietnam. Maybe they are not they are not completed and finalized. But as you can see again, Laos has entered into bilateral agreement with some specific countries. That's the case with Singapore and Japan when it comes to facilitating the registration of patent. This means that if you already have a patent that is registered in Singapore or Japan, you can it could actually help you and facilitate the registration of the same patent in Laos. It could go faster in that regard. There is also some cooperation in the field of trademarks and geographical indication with Cambodia also as well, and some other agreement cooperation for facilitating patent with China, the same as Singapore and Japan. So here we're talking about the law regulatory framework specifically. So, as I said, there was an amendment to the law on intellectual property recently, which was published on the official gazette of the Ministry of Justice maybe 2 weeks ago or so. So the law on intellectual property provides the general framework in relation to IP protection, but also IP registration. But that is the case for any type of law in Laos. The law will be likely general. Why? And too general sometimes, because the law is debated at the National Assembly. So the purpose and the objective here is that all the deputy actually voting for the law can understand all the articles and provision provided in the law. So that's why sometimes it's a little bit too general. And this is why also we will be thereafter issue some subsequent regulations, which will be speaking on a very specific topic. And that is why we do have in Laos a law on intellectual property, but then we have what we call a decision. That is a regulation issued by a specific ministry in charge of trademark, in charge of new plant varieties and so on. So we have decisions that will be providing more details to ensure the correct implementation of the law on intellectual property. So in Laos, they have issued in 2023 decisions in relation to trademarks, new plant varieties, copyright, geographical indication, and many other aspects of the intellectual property law, in order to precisely ensure the correct implementation of the law in intellectual property. So most of the time you will not find everything in the law, and many details actually will be provided in those decisions. And then I would say also as well that one other regulation that is very important is called the Instruction on the Protection of Intellectual Property for Customs Officer. And that is very interesting to note that instruction, taking into consideration what we just discussed about. So that instructions provide the possibility for trademark owner, industrial design, patent owner, geographical indication owner also as well, to register, to notify their intellectual property asset to customs officer, to checkpoint. In Laos, you have more or less maybe 25, 27 international checkpoints through which product can be imported into the country. So what is possible in Laos is now to notify your intellectual property asset to customs officer from all the checkpoints of Laos, telling them that if that works better if you actually have some precise information about a shipment containing infringing goods, but you are able to warn them of the potential incoming of a shipment containing goods infringing your intellectual property rights, and ask the officer to take an action accordingly. So that's very, very effective when it works well, because here we prevent the infringing product from being released in the market. And that's easier to stop those infringing products before they are released in the market. Otherwise, afterward, they will be spread all over the country, and that makes the task more difficult to prevent from the infringement of intellectual property rights. So now, finally, just speaking briefly about the main supervisory authorities of Laos taking care of handling intellectual property issues. So these are not all. I could have added also the Ministry of Justice, for instance, because the prosecutor is also playing a key role in relation to preventing and protecting intellectual property rights in Laos. But I did choose to talk about the Department of Intellectual Property firstly, under the Ministry of Industry and Commerce. Why? Because this is the Department of Intellectual Property that will be assessing, analyzing, and approving or not the registration of intellectual property. So whenever you want to register a trademark, that is the officer of the Department of Intellectual Property that will be examining, analyzing, and approving your application. If they don't approve it, they will issue what we call an office action, letting you know why they are not approving, and giving you also the possibility for you to respond to that and request for the registration. Then there is also the Internal Trade Department within the Ministry of Industry and Commerce. That specific department will be very used in relation to intellectual property enforcement. The same as with the economic police of the Ministry of Public Security. So every time we take an action about intellectual property enforcement, and when I say every time, it means when we do what we call a red action. So basically we go to shops, storehouse, warehouses, and seize counterfeit goods. There will be a committee that is appointed, and inside that committee, there will be different officers from different ministry that will be represented, and we will find people from the Department of Intellectual Property, Internal Trade, but also the police. That's a must. Sometimes also prosecutor will be also joining those red action in order to make sure that the red action and the seizing of the goods goes smooth. And then the Customs Department, that could, in my opinion, play a key role in Laos, given the geographical situation of the country. And they are the one to actually handle those customs registration. If you have any question about that later, please do feel free to ask me more questions on this specifically. So requirements to protect your IP and trademark in Laos. So here I will be speaking briefly about the type of IP that can be protected in Laos, and also what are the conditions to protect these. Also make sure that probably after the webinar or anytime in due course, you also go on the website of the Southeast Asia IP SME Helpdesk, because they do have a fact sheet that is super useful in relation to Laos, that will be providing you with lots of details in relation to the registration process, but also official fees. So what type of intellectual property is protected in Laos? As you can see, all of it, almost, I mean, the same as, I guess, as in Thailand or any European countries, for instance, trademark, patent, petit patent, visual design, copyright, geographical indication, layer design, integrated circuits, plant varieties, and trade secrets also as well. So here on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see that for some of those intellectual property, it is not even required to register them in order to be protected. That's the case for copyrights. So if I haven't made a drawing or painting, I do not need to have to register it with the Department of Intellectual Property to be protected. I just need to actually have sufficient evidence to prove that I was the first one to paint that painting, for instance. The same for a drawing or so on. And for trade secrets, that's the same. There are some criteria, conditions to be considered as a trade secret. For instance, one of them is making sure that the secret is not known to the public, for instance, otherwise it will not be considered as a trade secret anymore. And that very specific information is maybe known just by a small and limited circle of people. If that's the case, then we can call a secret like trade secret, and people holding trade secret are not supposed to disclose those secrets anymore. Otherwise, it could be subject to the infringement of intellectual property rights. And since now 2018, I believe, if I remember well, and the publication of the penal code, you have to know that in Laos, the infringement of intellectual property right can be subject to fines, but also imprisonment. So to register a patent and petit patent, again, that is not yet the most popular IP, intellectual property, that is registered in Laos. So the filing of the application must be done in Laos specifically. So it is not possible, for instance, to file an application from abroad to Laos. In order for a patent or petit patent, it must be proven that the invention is new, that there is also a technical improvement, that leads to an evolution of an innovative step, as we say, and that invention can be also industrially applicable in the field of industry, handicraft, agriculture, fisheries, services, etc. The time frame for the registration of patent for petit patent is supposed to be faster though, but for patent is 32 months. Now, I would like to say that in practice it can be longer than this. Our understanding is also as well that the examination of the patent is not made in Laos specifically. Usually the application will be sent overseas. I think now it's used to be Singapore taking care of it, but now I think Australia is also helping in the examination, in the substantive examination of patent application for Laos. And so it takes time. From our experience, there is just a handful of patent registration that are completed each year. And it takes time, a lot of follow-up with the officer. So if you have any issues, if you met with issues in relation to your patent registration in Laos, do not worry too much. That's pretty much normal. It takes a lot of time. However, it could be faster if you have used, like I showed you just before, what we call a process to shortcut the usual long time frame to complete the registration. For instance, if you have registered a patent in Japan or Singapore, then you may be able to proceed with the registration of your patent in Laos in a shorter time. For the term of protection is 20 years. Please do feel free also to refer to the official fees. They will be also available in the fact sheet of the Southeast Asia IP SME Helpdesk. So do feel free to go there and double check. By the way, here I'm basing myself on the LAOKIP official fee. So today it's, for instance, the filing fee for patents is €51, but As I have just told you about, there is the depreciation of the Lao kip may be evolving day by day. So I do not know if maybe the next 6 months, the price in euros will be the same. Industrial design. So again, that is something that we must file and register in Laos. So there is no possibility for you to file an industrial design from abroad with the Department of Intellectual Property in Laos. And that is something that become pretty trendy. In order to, there are some criteria and eligibility conditions to fulfill in order to be able to register your industrial design. The good thing about industrial design is now that the local officer, the Department of Intellectual Property, becomes more and more familiar with industrial design, so to speak. And personally, no, but our law firm was able to actually take action in relation to the infringement of industrial design recently, like seizing goods that is infringing industrial design patent. I think that's a very great step because before the officer, they were very familiar with trademark. So we knew that it was possible to actually implement, apply intellectual property rights in Laos in relation to trademark. That was more of a question mark for industrial design. So through a lot of negotiation, it is possible to actually through a lot of investigation and completing an application and a solid dossier that then you submit to the Department of Intellectual Property or the Economic Police, it is possible to actually implement intellectual property right in relation to industrial design. And the officer, they become more and more familiar. The only question mark maybe would remain for implementing those rights in some remote areas or provinces where officers are not yet very familiar with industrial design, for instance. And trademark. So trademark filing of application can be made in Laos, but also can be made abroad. As I just said, Laos is a member of the Madrid Protocol. So it is possible also, as soon as you have an international trademark, you can register your trademark from France, for instance, to Laos. That's something that is possible. One new thing also as well in Laos, but this is not something that is available to everybody, but to IP agents like ourselves, we can now actually file an application for trademark online. That was not the case until November 2023. And since I think the 1st of November, the first trademark application filed online through the system, the online system of the Department of Intellectual Property of Laos was made. And so that's a great step. I remember that we did suffer a lot during the COVID period where we had to file application, but we were not supposed to be able to go out. So we did have some exemption from the authorities to continue doing our job. So if something like that happened today, that would be not an issue anymore because now Laos offer the possibility to file online for a trademark application. What is a trademark? So a trademark under Lao law is defined as any sign, combination of signs capable of being distinguished from the goods or services of competitors. So that's how we will define the distinctiveness. So that's one of the criteria of a trademark. It must be distinctive from the other goods or services of the competitor. Your trademark may include words, personal name, letters, numeral, figurative element, something that is new, not from the newly amended law, but from the law before of 2017. It is now also possible to register 3D image, motion animated pictures, but also packaging, combination in color, and so on in Laos. So you have a wide range of possibility to register a trademark in Laos. If you have any maybe more question, do feel free to ask me during the Q&A session. And be careful that you have to choose a trademark that is not identical, but also similar to another registered trademark or even a well-known mark. Just about the process for examination of trademark. So it goes from the filing. Here, the officer, they will just make sure that you do have all the document that relates to your trademark application for registration. And then the formality examination. So that's basically what the officer will be checking. Did you send the application form provided by the Department of Intellectual Property? Did you provide a good specimen of your trademark for the intellectual property to register it, and so on? Once that the examination phase is done, there is one first publication made by the Department of Intellectual Property on their website to third parties. That will allow third party to actually oppose to the registration of a trademark. Let's say I did register a trademark, I have my certificate already, and then when I go to the website of the Department of Intellectual Property of Laos, I realize that someone is trying to register a trademark that looks identical or even just similar to mine, then I will have the possibility to file what we call an opposition to the registration of that trademark. And then there will be a period of 60 days for me to do so. And then it will be given the possibility for the actual applicant of the trademark registration to respond to my opposition. Thereafter, substantive examination. Here, the officer of the Department of Intellectual Property will make sure that your trademark does not contravene Lao law. And at the very end, there is a grant of certificate. Here, the process, it's not clear in the Lao law, but in practice, I can tell you the process is about 12 to 15 months. The process is shortening, the time process is shortening and shortening, but I would say still about a year to obtain the certificate of trademark registration. So the last part actually of our presentation today will be about implication for enterprise to provide goods and services without being incorporated in Laos. Here I will be speaking not only about trademark, but why foreign operators would want maybe to opt for acting via a franchisee, or a distributor to distribute goods and products of theirs in Laos. So there's various reasons for that. The first one is that in Laos, we do still have some restriction in relation to foreign direct investment. I will take one instance, maybe that could speak to you if you want to trade products into the Lao country. Let's say tomorrow you want to open a trading company, meaning that a company that does import, export, and distribution of commodities or goods in Laos. There is one restriction that will apply if a foreigner wants to hold 100% of the share equity of the company. That restriction is in relation to the registered capital that must be injected. Basically, if you want to own a company that does only import, export, and distribution activity in Laos of general goods, I'm not even talking about medicine or drugs, there is a minimum registered capital of $1 million that must be invested. Below that registered capital, you will still be able to invest in such a company, but you will not be able to own the totality or the total of the share equity of the company, and you will have to share it with the local shareholder. Just think about it, it's $1 million. It can be seen as pretty high for Laos, but since Laos now know a sharp depreciation of the Lao kip against foreign currency, even 3 years ago, I would have told you it was that the minimum registered capital for a foreigner would be of $2.5 million or so. So the depreciation of the Lao kip made maybe investment easier for foreigner, but still $1 million is still a lot to consider. So you may want to opt and to share your share equity with a local shareholder. And this is why many foreign operators would avoid to incorporate a legal entity in Laos. And they would want probably just to appoint a distributor or a franchisee to distribute their product into the Lao market on their behalf. And this is where the protection of your intellectual property comes into questions. How to protect your trademark from probably your distributor or franchisee. You want to make sure that you still hold control over the ownership of that trademark, even though the distributor would be the one to distribute your product into the country. So that's one of the advantages of having a distributor or franchisee. You can expand pretty quickly into the Laotian market, but that would apply the same into other markets from Southeast Asia at a lower financial cost. Also, you can rely on the distributor or franchisee that is familiar with the local context, so you don't have to think too much about it, or being familiar with the administration or even the requirements, the legal requirement and so on. All license requirement will be also handled by the distributor or the franchisee, and that can also apply in relation to your trademark. And from our experience, it's most of the time that specific model that will be used in the first place before maybe a foreign investor wants to invest further into the country. So the key consideration here, and specifically for your trademark registration. So if you do want to trade in Laos, product of your own bearing your trademark or bearing your, that is using your intellectual property rights. If we talk about trademark, make sure that you did file a trademark application for registration into Laos before, I would say, before you start the selling. Most of the time, what we can see from our client coming into Laos, they start registering their trademark maybe 2 years or 3 years before they do actually invest in the country, before they start the selling and the distribution of their product into the Laotian market, so that they are fully protected at the time they start operation or they start selling their product into the Laotian marketplace. One thing to remember is that Laos operate on the first to file system basis. That means that the first person to register a trademark will be granted with a monopoly over the use of that trademark. So you want to make sure that you promptly register your trademark into Laos before anybody else do so. Because if that happened, let's say you've been using your trademark long years in your country of origin, you come to Laos, you think that you will be able to use your trademark into Laos. But if someone else did register the trademark, it may be difficult actually to request for the cancellation of that trademark. It is true that now the law on intellectual property explicitly speak about registration of bad faith. So meaning that people that would register a trademark specifically in order to, I'd say, to use the name that is already well known in another country and to use that name into Laos. So it's possible to request the cancellation for bad faith registration. However, it is very difficult to guarantee how successful such an action would be. So this is why, please make sure that before you come to Laos, your trademark is duly and fully registered, and make sure that the distribution agreement or the franchise agreement that you have with your local partner ensure you full protection in relation to your intellectual property. In relation to the authorization for use of a trademark, there is a provision under Lao law, and specifically the decision, on trademarks, that provides that any agreement authorizing the use of a trademark, so it could be a license agreement, a franchise agreement, the name doesn't matter actually, it's the provision within the agreement that is important, must be registered with the Department of Intellectual Property. So meaning that most of the time, or every time actually, there is a franchise coming into Laos, they will have also the mandatory obligation to notify the use of the trademark from the franchisor to the franchisee here in Laos. They will have an obligation to notify to the Department of Intellectual Property. So you want to make sure that is done also properly. One thing also you want to make sure, in order for the protection of your intellectual property asset is duly is enforceable toward third party, you want to have that distribution or franchise agreement to be notarized here in Laos in order to ensure full enforceability. And also that's another matter, probably not directed towards intellectual property specifically, but please make sure that all the labeling are also in Lao language whenever you come and you want to distribute products of your own into Laos. The key consideration now for distributor and franchise agreement. So that is something that is a little bit different maybe for trademark, but that is very important that before you come into the Laotian marketplace, you do run a legal due diligence on your distributor. Make sure they have the right license, make sure that their business will not be disrupted because they are not compliant legally with the local authorities here. And also make sure that the distribution of franchise agreement that you're using is localized, specifically towards Lao law, and that all the provision that govern your distribution agreement or franchise agreement are enforceable if we have to go to the court here in Laos. So that is very important, because sometimes we do see many distribution agreement or franchise agreement that are not particularly localized for the Laotian marketplace. And so at some point when there is a dispute between the distributor and the person actually selling the goods in Laos, exporting the goods in Laos, or the franchisee and the franchisor, if there is a dispute and then the provision of the contract are not actually enforceable in Laos, it could be a huge issue for you. So that will be it actually from my part. Now I'm open to a Q&A session. I guess here Enrico will take the lead to let me know if there is any question in regard to the presentation or intellectual property more generally.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dino, for the insightful presentation. If any of the attendee, as I mentioned, we will share the slides with all of you. If you have any question about the content or something outside the content, you're welcome to explore the resources of the help desk and reach out to them directly via inquiry or setting up a one-on-one consultation. If you have any question right now, you can use this Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Just type in your question. We received 2 questions so far, so we're gonna read these 2 first, and potentially we can take a couple of more if you have any question. We'll dedicate the last 10 minutes to it. So we can just get right into it. One of these questions is, what are the biggest challenges on IP law enforcement in Laos?
That's a good question, because it's good to have laws and regulation, but if you cannot implement your rights, then that's a big issue, right? So I would say the most challenge in the first place in Laos was to make sure that the legal awareness of the administration in relation to intellectual property rights were well assimilated, because it's not the case now, maybe specifically on trademark, at least in most of the areas that we cover whenever we have to take action in relation to infringement of intellectual property rights for trademark. But the first difficulties was for us to have an officer or the Department of Intellectual Property that is reactive and that understand our concern and that understand also the infringement at stake. So I think now the officers here in Laos are pretty well aware of how things work. At least that's the case for the Department of Intellectual Property, and they even have developed some tools, very useful. Let's say tomorrow I go on the I walk in Laos, I go to some shops and I see someone infringing my intellectual property rights. There is now a possibility to submit to request a official opinion from the Department of Intellectual Property to ask them if the infringement I have seen on the marketplace is actually an infringement or not. And so that is very useful, because if I want to take an action with the legal authorities, so that could be an administrative remedy with the Department of Intellectual Property or even the economic police, if I want to file a criminal charge against the infringer, that is good to come up with something that is an opinion that is written from the authorities themselves, rather than just our own opinion. And it will provide more confidence for the authorities afterward to take a decision on whether or not, for instance, we should take an action by a redaction or seizing the counterfeit goods. So I think one of the main concerns is how well aware the authorities are. We do see some gap between officers from the Department of Intellectual Property. They are now very familiar with not only trademarks, but now they understand pretty well also as well industrial design. But when it comes maybe to the police, for them it's more new. And we see that even though the penal code provides the possibility to sanction by imprisonment IP infringer, for the economic police, the investigation yet take a little bit of time before it's completed. However, we're getting there. It's just taking time, as the same as it took time with the DIP, Department of Intellectual Property before. Now we have kind of the same work to do with the economic police officer, and the same goes also with the prosecutor. So I guess more interaction between the different administration would be welcome, so that everybody can understand what is at stake here. And I see there was also a second question: what are the most concerned before enter to Lao markets regarding IP in Laos? As I said, I think it's very important for you to register your intellectual property rights or intellectual property assets in Laos before you start the selling, because even though, as I said, bypass registration is prohibited under the law on intellectual property in Laos, but if you did not register the trademark at stake in the first place, if you're not the first, it could be difficult to actually ask for the cancellation of that trademark based on the bad faith use, for instance. So I would suggest very much for you to take action, and before you plan to invest in Laos or to release your product into the Lao market, please make sure that you are the owner of the of your trademark, and then everything will go well. We see so many cases every year where there is a local importer, for instance, appointed as a distributor of a brand owner based overseas, but the brand owner didn't register the trademark in Laos. The local importer take the opportunity to register the brand under its own name, and so the local importer becomes the brand owner. And although we understand the arguments from the brand owner based overseas, and they may want to cancel based on bad faith and so on, but it's not guaranteed that you will be that the action for using the trademark on bad faith use will be successful. So make sure that you do register your IP before you start releasing product or bearing your trademark in Laos. And yeah, I think you can contact me. I'm pretty. I see the second question. So I guess the slides will be provided to the audience, right, Enrico and Nora?
Yes, we'll share the slides with the attendees who attend the session. Yes, again, you're welcome to contact Dino or the help desk directly for consultation or further questions.
And I see another question in relation to any recent case study that IPKs won in Laos. So it depends what we talk about. So one thing is something that is not common, but it's not just about IP specifically in Laos, is that people do not automatically go to the court whenever they have a problem. And issues in relation to IP at the court level, it's difficult to tell exactly how many there have been, because this information is not, most of the time, is not publicly available. As far as I know, there was one case about copyright infringement. It was about a song, I think, long years ago. Now, that's the core level. But now, if we talk about administrative action, and when I talk about administrative action, it could be, I see, let's say, goods infringing a trademark as a law firm from one of our clients. Then we'll write a complaint to the Department of Intellectual Property to take action and to seize the infringing goods. So here it takes a lot of work before, because there is an investigation. We need to localize the goods, make sure that the goods are there before we do actually file what we call an administrative remedy with the Department of Intellectual Property. And recently, the Department of Intellectual Property have been very active. Before, I would say it was a challenge to make sure that we can act swiftly and fast to seize as much good as possible, I mean, infringing goods. So yes, we did have some recent nice example of a swift implementation of intellectual property rights and enforcement of those rights in Laos, and we were able to seize hundreds of boxes containing different type of infringing goods. So I would say yes, more and more, and not just based in Vientiane capital, we're able to file a complaint and to take action pretty swiftly against goods infringing trademarks, but also intellectual property rights such as industrial design, and working together with the relevant officers.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think I received a couple of questions via chat. Some of the attendees are having trouble with the Q&A function. The question was, what is the ratio between intellectual property versus trademark registration protections? Yeah, how many IP registrations and how many trademark registrations are there in a year? I think you may have had a slide on it.
I did. I will try to have more updated figures though, but as you can see, the registration ratio is for trademark is way more than it is for industrial design or patent. For patent, it can be explained by the fact also as well that patent protection in Laos is still nascent, and the examiners at the Department of Intellectual Property are not very well familiar yet, because I think it's more technical also as well in that sense. But for trademark, that's something that becomes very familiar. And also the Madrid Protocol, the possibility to file an intentional trademark from a different country to Laos directly, also enhanced and made the trademark registration more dynamic than it was. And now we can see also a surge of geographical indication registration within Laos recently, and that's good to see. So it shows that Laos attracts lots of brand owner, but also owner of geographical indication registration.
Thank you. We still have a bit of time, and we have one more question from the attendees. Let's see if we get a couple more. Is parallel trade, parallel import prohibited in the country?
Okay, so that's an issue, I think, that is of big interest to many people in Laos. So just for the rest of the audience to explain briefly what is parallel import. Parallel import is, let's say you have a company here in Laos, you sell your product, but your company and your brand is also located in another country. And so you go to that other country, you buy a lot of goods in that other country, maybe at a cheaper price, and then you come back to Laos and you just sell those goods in Laos. And that happens a lot in Laos because Vientiane capital, so that's the main economic area of Laos, is very close to the Thai border, and specifically the city Udon Thani or Nong Khai, where there are a lot of big supermarket and department malls. And many actually seller would go to Udon Thani, buy a lot of products at a very discounted price in Udon Thani, come back to Laos, and then sell those goods at a cheaper price than at a cheaper price than the price that same company but located in Laos would usually sell it. And so it's a big problem because that company in Laos that invested in marketing or hiring local people to promote the product and also to do research on the product, they are losing advantage and they cannot control the price. So in some countries, parallel import, meaning that you can prohibit people from going to another country, buy a lot of the product, and then come back to another country and sell those products. So in Laos, it's not possible to stop it. The stance of the Department of Intellectual Property is that as soon as someone is buying a product, then they become the brand owner, give away some of its management control, I would say, over products bearing that trademark. And so then the buyer and who's bought the product in Thailand then can come to Laos and just decide just to sell it to people and without breaching the law. In my view, there is some provision in the law on intellectual property that could be used against it, but as far as I know, that's not the stance, not the interpretation of the Department of Intellectual Property, and I do not know any type of action that were taken before the People's Court in Laos, for instance, in relation to parallel import. Now, it doesn't mean that this works for any type of product. For instance, for some product, it's necessary also to register those before being imported in Laos. And here I specifically think about drugs. If you want to import drugs into Laos, you must be a local importer, duly authorized by the Ministry of Health, and you must have received from the drug manufacturer an authorization to import those products into Laos, meaning that there is just one importer that can import a specific drug into the country. So if another importer is found to be importing those drugs that where the license registration is not held by this importer, then the manufacturer of the drug can prohibit, or even the local importer duly authorized by the manufacturer of the drug can prevent any third party from importing the drug for which he or she is authorized to import into Laos. But that for general goods, it does not apply. There is not such a system. So it's difficult in Laos, I think, to prevent parallel import 100%. There may be some possibilities, but it's not yet tested, I think, before the court or before the authorities.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Dino. I think we are pretty much right on time. And so thank you, Dino. Thank you, the help desk, and thank you, the attendees, for joining this session. We'll share the slides with you via email. Welcome to contact us, contact the help desk for more information on topics covered or non-covered in this session.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Have a good day. Take care.